Добрый день, на моих часах практически без 10-12.
Good morning, it's 10 to 12, or almost, and we are starting our session, the Star Trek, the new prospects and realities of tourism. I will tell you a few details about what we are going to talk about today. It's clear that the pandemic and the tourism sector, well, the tourism sector was really affected by the pandemic. Last year was the worst for the tourist sector in its history, about 11 times worse than the 2008 crisis. Talking about the numbers, according to the World Tourist Organization, in 2020, the world tourism lost $1.3 trillion. This is a huge number. And of course, I don't want to repeat that what people say, that a crisis is also an opportunity. I preferred the quote from the Washington Post is that a crisis is a disguised blessing, a blessing in disguise. And of course, it's also about masks. It's a masked opportunity. And we are all wearing masks. So right now we are having a pause in the tourist sector, and there are also projects for digitalization, for more corporate involvement. Recently, some new fashionable trends have been added, such as environment-friendly tourism. It's clear that the industry is changing, like in 2008. And back then, we remember some very interesting changes. For example, the launch of Airbnb, which is now a global platform that everyone is aware of. And there are some other important players who are ready to provide assistance in the tourist sector. Of course, the pandemic will change the tourism sector again. Now the question is, who is going to benefit from this? What to do with this delayed demand that we have, this pent-up demand, because we don't have this possibility to leave our country, or those possibilities are limited. We are going to discuss those issues today, and we are going to talk about how to support the players in this sector. What strategy should we follow? How can we help the maximum number of the involved parties, of the stakeholders? Today I have with us Irina Prunicheva, the head of tourism of the sector of Moscow, and we have more people, Sandra Karval, the head of Market Intelligence and Competitiveness World Tourism Organization. Hello, Sandra. Ahmed Ioueda, Global Coordinator of Cultural Heritage and Sustainable Tourism, World Bank. Hello, Ahmed. I welcome you. Chris Fair, President, CEO, Resonance Consultancy. Hello, Chris. Good morning, or good afternoon, or good evening, depending on what part of the day it is there. And Pedro Valle, Regional Director, Russia and CIS, Visit Flanders. I will take a couple of more minutes in order to talk about the technical possibilities during our session. As I already said, we will spend some time to give some background information. This means that each of our speakers is going to have about 6 or 7 minutes to give a talk and to share their opinion about all those issues that I just mentioned very quickly. In parallel, we are going to introduce 2 interactive formats to understand what is of interest to you, our audience. The first format is a poll. I will ask you to launch it in a couple of minutes. And the second one is your questions, of course. So after this first stage, when we have this background information, when every speaker has spoken, we will have about 20 minutes to organize a vivid discussion. I will see all the questions on my gadget. I also have some additional questions from my side, So this is going to be a non-planned discussion. Ekaterina, let us start with you. Well, sorry, it was a false start. Let's start with a poll, because it is going to touch upon the topic I'm going to start. This is our poll. The recovery of the tourist sector will happen in, and there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 possible answers. So I don't know if we have optimists amid us who will say that the recovery will be this year, or there will be people who can say it's in 2021, and the other answers are 2022, 2023, and 2024. And we will show the results on the screen. I'm going to often quote the World Tourist Organization today, most of the WTO experts. And at this session, the WTO is the World Tourist Organization, of course, because it's not the World Trade Organization. In our session, it will be the World Tourism Organization. So most of the experts are not expecting any recovery in this sector for a couple of years. Actually, some of them say that it will be 2024 at the best. And the most pessimistic scenario is having to wait for another 4 years. So what's your evaluation of the prospects for recovery in Moscow? Who should we support? What needs to be done? And in terms of digitalization, just a couple of years ago, we sat here with you in Moscow when the UN General Assembly came to Moscow, and we were discussing Ruspass. We could never anticipate this topic back then. So in terms of digitalization, what's happening in the city right now? Thank you very much. Hello, everyone. I'm really happy that despite all the restrictions, such events like Urban Forum, like a platform for experience exchange, are continuing their work. And if we talk about what we need to do in order to ensure tourism recovery, it's experience exchange, the launch of new projects, new formats. And within the last 2 years, we also talked a lot about communications. It's the buzzword today. So let's talk about tourism now. What is it all about? Unfortunately, my clicker is not functioning. Can you help me? Yes, I will try to do something. I usually can do this, but I need the slides. Let's switch the slides on.
Чтобы мы могли ей отсюда управлять.
And we need to be able to control it. Okay, let's start the conversation because we have a tough schedule, but anyway, what's happening now? It's clear that there are restrictions caused by the pandemic. And of course, they impacted the industry. The tourism numbers dwindled. The number of tourists coming to Moscow went down. What barriers are there? And what points of growth do we have now, thanks to this situation? Let's start talking about the barriers and the expectations. So, what's the main expectation? This spring, we had a forecast of our plans, and our respondents were the residents of the Russian Federation who participated in a survey about the new trends in tourism. And they answered the question of what products were important to recover tourism in Russia and also international tourism. It's important to point out the following thing. The main expectation or the main demand is the request for safety. It's about medical safety. It's about economic security and transport security and safety. Because the most important problem that travelers are facing is that their safety and security are not always ensured. So we understand that this barrier that we have involving health and the probability to fall ill, so it's really important to tackle this issue. The second preference is the preference for an individual approach. Of course, group tours that the sector organized took up the leading place in the portfolio in the past. But right now, they are not in such great demand because it's all about the safety of a journey. The more people there are in a group, the more difficult it is to guarantee health safety. And also the main trend today is communications, and also there are a lot of requests for trips or voyages in small groups where people want to communicate with each other, want to communicate with some loved ones, with their family. And right now the industry needs to be ready for launching new projects designed for small groups of tourists who are going somewhere spontaneously. And the important thing is that the majority of travelers said that the opportunity to travel, the possibility to travel, is paramount for them. Last year, Yandex carried out a survey. It was just after the lifting of the first lockdown restrictions, and 80% of respondents said that they were ready.
Сложившийся за пандемию образ действия и готовы поехать
to change their plans and to travel as soon as there is an opportunity to travel. So people are ready to travel. Moreover, traveling is an important part of happiness and life satisfaction, and we, as representatives of the government and of the industry, need to guarantee that traveling is safe from the medical point of view, and we need to respect this demand. A little bit of magic. Let's talk about the trends we are talking about. There is an expectation of quality service. Our guests want to have medical aid at any moment. And there is also niche tourism. The tourist sector should offer individual approaches for anyone. It can be ecotourism, industrial tourism, or cultural and educational tourism. New opportunities. What other trends do we have? And what's our point of growth? It's those people who are used to working remotely. We've got lockdown for about 18 months in many countries. People do not have any possibility to travel. Therefore, people want to work comfortably. Life and work are more and more intertwined. They're all mixed up, so this is why there is a request for the so-called digital nomads. Digital nomads are a special kind of tourists who are ready to travel while working, and the industry should now react to this new trend. You talked about digital nomads. You have only 1 minute left. Can you tell us something about the digital format, because it's so important? Yes, of course. We need to understand that the two formats that are very popular right now is Ruspass. Thank you, Tatiana, for bringing it up. And this is also the possibility for individualization. Ruspass is the opportunity for the industry to create new offers, and it's about government support. promotion of new offers. Why is this important?
В принципе образа жизни, как
It's about safety and digitalization of our lifestyle. As a result, we need to give the opportunity of individual choice. Just through one or two clicks, you can look up what famous bloggers are doing and plan your journey. And there is another trend behind digitalization. This is a platform for industry communication. We also have Moscow Travel Hub starting from last year, and it was a program aiming to open up new formats in order to digitalize those offers that the tourist sector players have, not only tour operators but also hotels and sites. So what do we have now? It's three different formats of industry communication. We have a travel hub, which gives you the opportunity
и отрасли создавать новые предложения. Фабрика туристических
to
продуктов.
create new offers. We also have a factory of tourist products
И, безусловно,
providing interesting offers to the travelers. And of course, it's educational and communication products for the industry. So our future trend is individual approach, digitalization of offers, and of course, digitalization of the industry.
Возросла, и, конечно,
Our digital literacy has grown,
очень сильно возросли.
so now we have more offers and more opportunities. Let's have results of
Год у нас
questionnaire to see what year was the most voted for. And now I've been preparing Chris's presentation, so we will pass to your presentation soon. Okay,
максимальное количество за 23.
most respondents are for 2023. Chris, let's
Тут уже с
switch to your presentation because we started to talk about recovery of tourist sector and about trends that may help. It is clear that internal tourism has a real opportunity to grow right now because we are physically closed in the limits of our countries. Should we pay more attention to internal tourism
условно на внутренних, да,
and to attract our tourists into our internal sites and to test some offers on internal level to
встречала тезис о том, что
propose it then abroad. And then I heard about an idea that city tourism is very adaptable and easy
обсуждать тезис
to change. We won't even talk about an idea that tourist sector depends on vaccination rhythm. Every article says about that, and it is clear. But my first question is about city tourism, and the second question about the internal tourism. Could it be a pillar of recovery? How do you think? Yes, it is clear that we have an opportunity
разобраться и с теми наболевшими
to solve some old problems like ecology, environment, and travel that may be more ecological, hotels quality,
и,
and so on. We are also talking about
как бы это правильно сказать, излишний туризм.
some extra tourism, over tourism. Okay,
Проблемы сейчас
what are the problems that we are facing now, and what are the problems should be resolved in priority right now, please?
Well, thank you very much for your questions, and I'll try and answer those in 5 parts. First, it's a pleasure to join you. I'm joining you from Vancouver in Canada today, and here next to the U.S. in our work at Resonance, working with different cities across the Americas. You know, we have a front row seat as many destinations in the U.S. have been open for a couple of months now, so we're starting to see what recovery might look like. And our first observation is that the recovery of travel and tourism, when you look at the poll, guessing what year's the answer, we think all of those answers are correct. And the reality is that we won't see a V-shaped recovery where all destinations and all segments of the industry recover at the same time. Instead, we expect to see a more of a K-shaped recovery, where segments of the industry, in fact, some we're seeing have already not only recovered, but have surpassed the records they were setting in 2019, while other destinations or segments of the industry within destinations may struggle for many years to come. And we're seeing that actually unfold here in the United States, where many luxury destinations are already achieving the highest rates in occupancy and RevPAR that they've ever had, even higher than they were before the pandemic. So these resort destinations are doing very well. And at the other end of the spectrum, so too is the economy segment of the market. And it's really the middle of the market that relies on business travel, meetings, conventions, and events that's languishing. So that's within a recovering destination. But as we also look internationally, destinations are going to recover at different speeds and times, as you mentioned, based on vaccinations and policies between countries. So those destinations that were largely domestic before, recovering quicker, while those destinations that relied more on international travelers have a longer road to go. I think the second key point to your questions is really about thinking. You mentioned over tourism, and that, while COVID is a disease that really has decimated the tourism industry, in some ways it has been a cure for some elements and issues with tourism that we were seeing prior to the pandemic, with over tourism and too many international travelers in certain periods of time in certain destinations. So of course, tourism coming to a full stop, this is an opportunity that some cities we're working with that are looking at as an opportunity to reset tourism in their destination. Places like Amsterdam that are looking at relocating the red light district. This is an opportunity to think about shifts in policy and how visitors consume and visit the destination that can be put in place now. Or in Barcelona, work that was done prior to the pandemic with thinking about Las Ramblas, the pedestrian boulevard, and policies and design changes that could be made to return that street to make it more accessible to citizens rather than just tourists. So these are all changes during this moment in time that we see as positive elements. I think the third key point, as you mentioned, towards thinking about remote work and how that might affect cities, we do think about that as a major trend, and regardless of how much or how little you think people within one country to the next will work remotely, it does stand to reason that that will have an effect on tourism, and an opportunity for something of what we call residential tourism, where visitors are coming to cities for longer periods of time, staying in residential apartments or parts of the city. And of course, we saw this, as you mentioned, with Airbnb and the rise of that platform over the last 5 to 7 years. So this is a trend that could really accelerate coming out of the pandemic as cities recover. And we see residential tourism as actually a really positive force to look at in terms of gaining the economic impact of visitors that come for longer periods of time, but with less requirements on infrastructure in terms of transportation to and from the destination. I think this idea about remote work is also ties into, as you think about video conferencing, and we're attending this conference by Zoom. And of course, we've all learned how to do many business meetings by Zoom, and that will have a negative impact, on independent and individual business travel. But what's less talked about, and as we see as a potential trend coming out of this, is that if more people are working remotely, it's more likely that we'll see a rise in a need for group business travel. And we can see evidence of this prior to the pandemic in cities like Seattle, with companies and corporate headquarters for Amazon and Microsoft. Just those two companies alone accounted for more than 25% of all meeting and group business within the city of Seattle, as they brought clients and workers from different offices together for various meetings, conferences, and events. So if employees are working more remotely, we see this counter trend to that of companies needing to bring their employees and their workforce together. So this could create demand for a different type of business travel that may replace the independent and individual business travel, or even supplant it in the future. So I think it's just, as you think about our hope and vision for what tourism looks like within our cities, is that these confluence of trends will help create a more sustainable version of urban tourism coming out of the pandemic. That really the impact of tourism on our cities is driven by a high frequency, short duration of stays. That if we can shift that model and that behavior towards less visits of longer duration, we will be able to see the same sort of economic contribution of tourism to the urban economies but reduce the impact and the cost that goes along with it. And that would likely lead to a more sustainable and prosperous vision for tourism in our cities in the years to come, cities around the globe.
Thank you, Chris. Perfect with the timing. And I've been surprised. I forgot about digital nomads. Yes, this is something important. This is like a moving force. Thank you, Chris, for making a bridge to my next topic. I would like to talk about sustainable development. Yes, I saw a lot of data provided by World Tourist Organization, and I discovered some interesting ideas. That was a document of Welcome City Lab and France Tourism Agency. 5 trends were listed in this document, and these trends will develop this sector, taking into account pandemic factors. So these are the following factors. Health factor, digital transformation factor. We talk about this all the time, and we know this concept. We know all the terms related to this, and then conscient consummation. This is the 3rd trend. I would like to talk about this in details. Let's talk about this later. And we have another 2 trends: immersive technologies and priority of city as a center of attraction. As for immersive technologies, we will talk about this later also. Okay, conscious consummation, new trends in city tourism. So I would like to talk about these 2 topics with Sandra. Sandra, do you agree that now those 2 trends are leading ones, and what we can do from the point of view of sustainable development that is also in the agenda, but now we do not understand what we will do with this trend, even if it is in fashion, but let's make it more concrete. Let's make it more clear how to use this concept, please.
Thank you very much. A very good morning from Madrid to Moscow. It's a pleasure to be with you this morning, unfortunately in a virtual manner, but I'm very looking forward. We have a presential event next week in Porto with some major cities, and very much looking forward to see Katarina there. So I think this is also a good message that the meetings industry, with another dimension and another approach in taking safety concerns at the heart, can start little by little. So thank you so much for your question. And if you allow me, I will share my screen to just give you a little bit of a background also of what was discussed and steering this discussion towards your issues on how do we rethink tourism in the pandemic, but also in the urban agenda. And you mentioned before, what we're seeing now is really an acceleration of the trends that we were watching pre-pandemic. And we've seen how technology has accelerated our remote working, our teleconferencing, but how many tools digitally emerged. The death of QR codes, which was something that probably 2 years ago no one used, has just become one of the things we use every day. So I think it's important that we know that those are trends that were there. They were accelerated, and we need to be in pace with them. Just to give you a little bit of background where we are as well, and to add to the discussion of the recovery and to your poll, as you mentioned before, unfortunately, international tourism is back into levels of 30 years ago. So I think this is very important because we know the sector is still in dire need of support. It's a sector that's been highly affected, and it needs obviously support to restart, and vaccination here will be a critical issue, as we are seeing in the countries that are advancing in this regard. We estimate that globally we've probably lost indirect GDP more than $2 trillion US dollars. Our data shows that also, unfortunately, the trend that we saw in 2020 in the first months of this year has continued, as many countries around the world have still maintained their travel restrictions. And also to your point before on when we see recover, as Chris was mentioned, and I think we need to be aware of that, it will be a very diverse and very different paced recovery. So we cannot say there is one picture that can actually explain the recovery of tourism. We will probably see countries in Asia Pacific, unfortunately, where borders are still very much closed, going a little bit slower. We're seeing Europe advancing, particularly with the issues of the COVID certificate now in the Schengen area. But we're also seeing, for example, the US and Canada moving quickly on vaccination, and that will have definitely an impact positively. Our scenarios for this year are still, unfortunately, on the very negative side. We foresee that globally, compared to the year 2019, we will probably still end at minus 63 or minus 75. But obviously, we're talking about international tourism. And as it was mentioned, we do see an enormous pickup in domestic. In many markets, domestic is already over the levels of 2019. And we do know that in many countries, domestic is a very significant part of tourism. It often in countries that we don't think about, like Germany, for example, it has a higher value than international tourism. So also for the discussion on urban tourism, I think rethinking the concept of domestic tourism and the links with other cities is critical. To your point, when do we return? And just to add to your own survey, this is a survey that we run with a panel of experts for some time. And in the latest wave that we did in May, most of the experts that were surveyed did say that they would not see recovery before, as you can see, 2023 or 2024 or later. But it's also interesting to see that we do have some more optimistic views in the Middle East, for example, in Africa and in Europe. So on the topic of urban tourism recovery, we know the big challenge is recovering travelers' confidence. And this is mostly connected with the restrictions still in place. It's very difficult at this moment to actually plan for travel. And this is why from the side of UNWTO, our call for governments to continue working on harmonization travel restrictions, but communicate them very clearly, because this is one of the big issues. Also in terms of operation, it is important to more and more be flexible with bookings. We know that consumers often cannot book because they don't know what will be the restrictions in the next 2 weeks. Little by little, it is important to promote the safe return of international city travelers. And we are seeing that in many European cities, particularly with the nomads. I can tell you in Madrid, it's very clear that we had a significant movement of digital nomads coming to Madrid in the last months, but also to continue supporting the sector. As I said, the sector still has a way in front of us of many challenging months. Looking at the opportunities and also of sustainability, as you mentioned, we started in 2009 focusing obviously on the big challenges that over-tourism was bringing to cities, particularly in terms of flows management, impact on housing, but also the relationship between citizens and tourists. And I think this is something that should and must be at the center of the rethinking of tourism in the urban agenda as we go out of the pandemic. And I just leave you with few points that from our side are critical and that we are trying to advance with cities worldwide. One is to use more and more technology and big data to manage urban tourism. We can actually have information, and Barcelona is an example with a new application, or where tourists are concentrated, get that information in apps to the tourists so they avoid crowds, which is even more important now where safety and security is paramount. A second opportunity, which I think is often not very mentioned, is the issue of accessible tourism. Accessibility is not only a key issue for human rights, but it's also a very important economic opportunity. Senior citizens, citizens with some kind of disability will be needing support, and we need to make cities accessible to all. The third point is we need to innovate in products and experiences. As Katerina was saying, we have a new tourist. We have a tourist that has new concerns. So open air experiences, the diversification of experiences throughout the city, which also contributes to diversify the tourism flow outside the city to disperse demand. And we need to make...
Sandra, I'm sorry, I have to interrupt you because you have only 20 seconds left. We have a very short time.
No worries at all. I'll leave you with one key point for us, which is we need to consider tourists as temporary residents, and we need to make sure that tourism planning for cities is equally for tourists, but mostly focused on the well-being of cities. And that's all for my 20 seconds.
Спасибо большое, Сандра. Прекрасно меня сегодня спикеры.
Thank you, Sandra. Thank you for respecting the timing, and thank you for your presentation.
Удивительная органика должна быть, чтобы...
Indeed, this is really amazing. Everyone is able to do this. Ahmed, let's move on to you. I will actually shorten my introduction, but I mentioned immersive technologies. That's one of the 5 trends that I mentioned before moving on to Sandra. But let's talk about those technologies a little bit wider. What are those immersive technologies, immersive things? It's always about culture, right? Because culture has been playing a major role in global tourism, maybe 40%. But amid pandemic, we can't have an access to different monuments, architectural buildings. We can't always go to museums and so on. So can anything be reinvented here so that cultural tourism becomes one of the pillars for development? And I mentioned a lot the data of the World Tourism Organization. And what about the World Bank? What data do you have? What are your expectations in terms of recovery? And what are you proposing in terms of support measures?
Thank you very much, Tatiana. It's really a pleasure to be hosted, to be talking today to Moscow Urban Forum, and I would like to send my greetings and to everyone today in the panel, but especially also to Ekaterina Bronicheva, and congratulate her for the great work Moscow is doing to have a safe reopening and economic recovery. So I will represent the World Bank today to continue on what Sandra said about the global perspective when it comes to sustainable tourism and the urban tourism. So I think, we all know that before the COVID, tourism was really growing very fast, and it was creating 1 of 10 jobs globally, 10% of global GDP, 7% of global export, 1.4 trillion tourism receipt. But also the inclusion part, 54% of jobs were for women and youth, and sustainable and significant amount of revenues. So the World Bank, with the COVID, before COVID was helping countries to have an integrated approach to tourism. So we have like $5.6 billion support to different countries, different destinations, to look at destination management, destination quality, marketing, promotion, skills, including in Russia, for example, St. Petersburg. But now what we see, what countries want is when they want support in tourism, they want A, in the vaccine, but then B, how to use investment in tourism and culture as part of the fiscal stimulus package, and use this pause, as you said, from tourism to improve the quality of tourism destinations, especially urban tourism destinations, and improve the skills and technology. So because once tourism reopen, it will be major digital transformation with contactless tourism services. And I think we all agree that what we have seen with COVID is like have never seen before. And to answer your earlier question, how it may take, WTTC made a survey, it said it will take similar pandemic, similar crisis can take 19 months to recover. But the challenge, Ekaterina, is that, Tatiana, is that we haven't really seen the bottom. of it to start to click the 19 months. So I think we have to wait until we go to the bottom of it, and then you count the meter of 19 months of recovery. But as Sandra said and Chris said, we will see different recovery coming at different pace in different destinations, different regions. I would like to leave you with three important, I think, messages. One is that I think each country, each destination needs to understand what really changed, what has not changed with the COVID situation. I mean, as we reopen, what has changed is that we see more demand on more needs for health and hygiene, as Katrina said. We will see, as Chris said, more demand for domestic and regional tourism, especially if this bubble works. We'll see more interest on natural-based tourism, and perhaps we'll see less on tourism products related to MICE or indoor and museum and so on. We will see also change in the model due to the consolidation and corporate restructuring. We'll definitely, I think everybody talked about the digital technology. We'll see more automation, innovation, and technology, and more enterprises will need fiscal support for continuation. But what hasn't changed is if it's a bad quality destination, it's still bad and will remain badly managed after the crisis. So use this time to improve the quality of your destination, diversify products, and maybe disperse if it was suffering from mass tourism. We will see also physical assets are still there, if you have a culture or something. So that didn't change. And tourism, I think, will remain a priority for people and for travelers. Now, I would like to talk about, a framework the World Bank is suggesting as we move as we start to reopen. An integrated framework that looks at destinations which want to be ready to reopen. Will look at people, policies, and places. And I think that's what has been talking today. We need to put people at the center. So the direct and indirect jobs and livelihood as they reopen, the SMEs, the gender aspects, the cultural heritage. Policies, we need to see significant policy change into market demand and regulation and strategic planning and coordination. We need to see places more safe to reopen. You talked about hygiene and safety. We need the quality of tourism destination to improve, investment in infrastructure and livability of destination. Now, I think Moscow provide a very good example. And finally, to talk about your example about cultural, I think as tourism picks up, the World Bank and UNESCO recently published a position paper. We call it Cities, Culture, and Creativity. The culture and creative industry will play a very important role as we start to reopen, whether for domestic or international travelers, because this culture and creative industry, whether it's gastronomy, costume, performance, music, media, they contribute 2.2 trillion to the revenues of 3% of global GDP, with significant number of jobs. So the second framework I will end up now saying is that we put this framework for cities which want to support this culture and creative industries with 6 enablers that can foster the growth of culture and creative industries, ranging from skills to digital community to infrastructure, uniqueness, and urban space. If you do that, we'll get 3 outcomes: the spatial benefits, the economic benefits, and the social benefits. Thank you, and it was a pleasure talking to you today.
Спасибо большое, Ахмед. Я, кстати, хочу отметить, что все презентации...
Thank you very much, Ahmed. And I would like to point out that all the presentations that we are working with will be still available after the session, and all our speakers will be happy to share all the materials. Pedro, let's move on to you. If you can just speak for 6 or 7 minutes, we will only have a couple of minutes, and we will be able to make another survey, and then it will be a blitz survey. Moving on to you. Andrea is well known among Russians because we know A lot of artists like Rubens, Bruegel from Flandria, they are even in the school curriculum, but nevertheless, you have a very fundamental approach in terms of what you are doing in tourism. You thought about transformation back in 2017. And so what did you have as a basis? You had a great survey among tourists. What makes their trip special? What leaves an unforgettable impression? 50% said it was places, 30% the meetings with local residents, and 20% mentioned activities. That's on the one side. On the other side, of course, you have examples from other European regions where there is a lot of tourism, even excessive tourism, and some local residents even disliked tourism because of that. But at the same time, you carried out a huge strategy. It was a 10-year strategy. That's one story. And I really liked the name of your strategy. It's an ambitious name. It's called Travel to Tomorrow. So can you tell us about what it is based on? And can you give us some specific examples so that we have a concrete discussion? And of course, COVID had to make some changes in this program. Thank you very much. Good morning, Russia. Good morning, Moscow. Thank you for the invitation to speak at the forum with such great participants.
Comfortable for all of us. Allow me to share my screen with you. Here we go. Voila, that's it. So yes, indeed, prior to COVID, we were doing research, surveys. We organized a summit in order to rethink tourism. And our starting point indeed was that tourism is still a positive thing that can have a meaningful impact. But we want to make a shift in which we adapt the economic story from just more to more added value in order to become a flourishing destination. And we as a government organization, as a tourism board, we need to adapt our policy, our investments, and our international promotion strategy to that. So I'm trying to change the slides, but it doesn't seem to work.
Сейчас мы тоже подключимся и начнем шаманить.
We are going to get involved as well, and we are going to try something. But anyway, don't pay attention to the slides. We can hear you very well.
It works, Sarah. Computers are always a bit difficult. So profit, visitor numbers, and economic data are no longer the only elements that are important to measure the success of tourism. So we see tourism no longer as a goal in itself, but as an added value in order to create added value for all stakeholders in a certain location. And the best way to visualize it is with this tree. Which we use as a strong metaphor. We look at the destination as a living organism in which everything is connected. So tomorrow's tourism, like a tree, will be rooted in local communities, in neighborhoods, villages, and cities, of course. And in order to make these places flourish, like a tree blossom, there needs to be a balance between the local residents, the visitors, and local businesses. And with our policy, we want to ensure that tourism contributes to the well-being of the residents in a certain place. This is just in a nutshell how what Travel to Tomorrow is about. There's plenty more in-depth materials, interviews, and concrete ways to implement Travel to Tomorrow, which we'll find in the links in the presentation, which we will share with you afterwards. But now let's have a look at why we decided to change our approach to tourism and why we are moving towards tourism with added value. Well, of course, pre-COVID, there was a situation of over-tourism. And of course, it will take now, due to the pandemic, up till 23, 24, we saw in the approach you did. But even for Flanders, we even think that it will take till 25, 26 to recover. But tourism flow will continue to grow. There's also the digitalization, which got a boost due to the pandemic. There is health and economic crises. And we as a government, we want to help our tourism sector to become future-proof. Now, let me tell you that tourism is still very much important for our destination. And here is a concrete number. In 2029, prior to COVID, 71% of visitors in our historic cities of Bruges, Ghent, Antwerp, Brussels, and so on are international, and only 29% domestic. This means that international tourism is still very much important for our destination. And with local tourism, we are just a small country with a small population. Domestic tourism is not enough to make up for that. But nevertheless, we want to use this momentum, as Chris also said, we want to use this momentum and this corona crisis to rethink tourism. And we want to accelerate this process of added value-based thinking and forcing the tourism sector to innovate even more. Now, how do we move towards tourism with added value? Well, let me give you a concrete example from our MICE marketing approach. Within MICE, Visit Flanders only focuses on international association conferences. We attract international conferences that match with our cultural assets as a destination, like arts, heritage, gastronomy, but that also match with the priority domains set out by our government, being circular economy, healthcare, smart living, mobility, and so on. And pointed out by Sandra, we also use the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals to define which conferences are important. So what do? We no longer simply attract more conferences, but we attract better ones. That is our aim. And these conferences should have a positive impact on the destination. This impact could be a boost for our economy, research and development, or the academic world in a certain topic or sphere. But the impact could also be reputational. Choosing Flanders should also be of added value for the conference organizers themselves, not only because we have a beautiful destination, but because we excel in their field of business. And conferences, as a third point, should also create a legacy. That is something that lives on and is beneficial for the society and destination. This could be new policy created based on new insights, new investments, new startups, which lead to improvement of quality of life. But I've said there's the COVID crisis, and we want to take it as a momentum to make fundamental changes. But first of all, it's important to keep our sector healthy and to help them come out of this crisis. And the Flemish government and Visit Flanders have put a series of short-term and long-term support measures in place. And here are briefly just a few examples. In the short term, for instance, in this governance period, our tourism board is extending 30 million in subsidies and free loans to accommodations and attractions in order to invest in ecological measures, health measures, digitalization, and the professionalization of their staff. The second example is that we extend a 10 million subsidy to the event sector in order to help them organize COVID-safe events. Flanders is a culturally rich destination with a highly creative sector, and we want to give oxygen to that cultural and creative sector as we find them vital to contribute to social and economic recovery. And this is very much in line with what Ahmed said in his last point. We also have a lot of small and medium-sized enterprises in our economy, and especially in tourism, and we want them, with our whole range of tools and subsidies, to survive. And let me give you two examples of long-term investments. So in this governance period, we are investing about 150 million euro in our assets, which are gastronomy, heritage, nature. And a concrete example, for instance, is making the network of Flanders heritage venues. These are partners with a heritage venue in a beautiful location. We help them to make them future-proof so that they can organize hybrid events in the future. And in line with that, we're also developing a digital platform called Hyber in order to combine the real with the virtual. And we also want to integrate virtual experiences in there so that people following from home still feel at the destination. And we as a government organization and as a tourism board, we very much believe in this digital aspect. And it's an element which is to stay post-COVID, and that's why we also gladly invest in it. And as a closing thought, I would maybe also want to say that it's not only up to cities to rethink tourism, but it's also up to all of us to think about the way we travel. And I think it would be wonderful if we start treating tourism less as a commodity, but more as a more precious good, and that we start traveling more consciously with respect and gratitude and with openness and for meaningful encounters instead of the commodity that tourism became pre-COVID. And so this is an open invitation to join us on our journey to tomorrow for a better kind of tourism. Thank you.
Да, спасибо большое, Педро. Мне очень резонирует, правда, то, что вы...
Thank you very much. It really resonates within me, the fact that you are mentioning values and our need to change the approach to our travel trips. We only have 30 seconds, but I will have a delay of about 5 minutes. Can you show the last poll? And that's actually the question that we have here. How soon are you going to go on a foreign trip? In 1 month, in 1 week, in 6 months? Or I'm not ready, I am only looking at home travels, home tours. You can look at the online formats, and I also have a blitz survey for all our speakers. And closer to the end, our speaker mentioned some measures taken in Flandria to support the sector. So this is the survey that I would like to offer you. One support measure. Can you tell us what is one support measure that is important? Why is it important right now and right now? Just 30 seconds, please. Sandra, let's start with you. Now, we will start with online guests, with you, Ekaterina, and then we'll get back to our studio.
Thank you. I would say skills development in digital transformation.
Ахмед, что вы скажете?
And you, Ahmed, what do you think?
I think a safe quality of destinations.
Крис, ваша очередь.
Chris, your tour.
I think one of the biggest things we'll need is support for labor and development in terms of bringing workforce back into the industry as it recovers.
Pedro,
and what do you think? I think it will be more or less similar what you just said, or not.
It coincides with the other speakers, and I think it must be a balance, the digital, supporting the workforce, and never forget the creativity. Keep on being creative.
Я вот абсолютно поддерживаю креативность.
Yes, I am really for the creativity. And you, Ekaterina, what do you think? I would prefer the help to create new products for every audience. It means a transformation not only on a digital level, but help to the transformation of the sector. When we leave old formats and we prefer new ones. Yes, it's similar to a creativity concept. Okay, let's have a look on the result of a poll. What do we have? Okay, in 3 or 6 months, everybody is ready to go abroad. I don't know whether it is too optimistic or not, but we will believe that in 6 months we will be all able to go abroad to travel. Okay, thank you for all speakers for this discussion. We're only 3 minutes late. Yes, time is not enough. We would like to talk about expos and so on. Let's talk next year during at least 1 hour and a half. Thank you. Bye-bye.